Picaro slammed it home. Garland left wing, free ball. Perfect. Garland went to the lane, lobbed to Mobley. Pow! And Allen blocked the shot at the rim. Pow! With the left hand and a foul.
Hello and welcome to the Chase Down Podcast. The Cavaliers have won their sixth consecutive game with a 40-point drubbing of the Milwaukee Bucks. The Chase Down Podcast is presented by Fubo, the official streaming partner of the Cavs. Watch over 350 channels of live sports and TV, including Bally Sports Ohio, without cable. There is no cost. There is no commitment. Try for free at FuboTV.com/Cavs. As I mentioned, the Cleveland Cavaliers are on a roll, and boy, was this a fun one on national TV. Continuing to be down Darius Garland, continuing to be down Evan Mobley. The team is now 11-3 since both those guys went out of the lineup. And joining me, I'm so sorry, buddy. I thought we'd have a competitive one to talk about. Is the Gyro Step's Ti Windisch. How you doing, Ty?
I've been better. I also thought we'd have a competitive one to talk about. Didn't realize Giannis wouldn't play until soon before the game, like everyone else. Did know that he had some shoulder discomfort. You know, you were talking about Fubo on the way in and all the channels, but right now, after that game, I'm more interested in the non-sports channels. I don't know if you know it off top, but would love to tune into Fubo right now and maybe see not sports, not anything else really, nature shows. I don't know, probably not the news, but I think there's a lot of other things I'd like to watch. But excited to join you as always, Carter, and talk about the Bucks and the Cavs, even though the Bucks did not give us a very exciting game to record right after at all.
Of course, and you know, if you're looking for any sort of television of any kind, Fubo TV is the place to go. If you are a avid watcher of the Chase Down Pod, you might notice Justin Rowan not here. He has absconded from frozen Winnipeg, leaving us in frozen Ohio to go to Mexico for like a week and a half. So you'll see me for better or worse. I will be hosting and having a series of guests. Maybe no one will match you, Ty, but hopefully we can get up there.
I don't believe that, and even if that were true, the basketball should be so much better that the podcast experience for your listeners might be even better. I mean, I was wanting to get mad about like calls like 2 minutes into this game, and I was like, I don't know, I don't care anymore. It doesn't matter. They could have the worst whistle of all time. They didn't come to play at a certain point, the Bucks. So. But I'll try and bring some energy anyway, and thankfully, you know, there's other things besides just this game to talk about. And you know, Georges Niang career high. Shout out to minivans everywhere. Is that where you'd start from this game? What stood out to you the most from the Cavs' perspective?
You know what I want to say? I want to say that Georges Niang has a degree of selflessness that I find so admirable. Because let me tell you something, Ty. If I start a game and I'm Georges Niang and I start a game 10 of 10 from the field and have set a new career high, you could not pay me double. You could not double my salary to take another shot and potentially miss and have and ruin a perfect game.
That's true. He did. He was probably destined for one of those ESPN Sports and Info tweets if he didn't shoot again. 13 for 14 and 33. 33, though, that's the other side of it. I mean, when you're Georges Niang and you see I can get a 30 ball tonight against the Milwaukee Bucks with Damian Lillard on the floor, I mean, like when he's retelling this someday, you know, you don't mention who wasn't in the game. You mention, hey, we went up against Dame and the Bucks, smoked them. I had 33. I led the game in scoring. Just, you know, Donovan Mitchell, I carried him as always. Nothing new. But yeah, it was.
And if anyone's going to do that, it's Georges Niang. I mean, honestly, I will say this: like, you know, all jokes aside, George has had a pretty rough year. You know, shooting the basketball. Yeah. You know, he's shooting a career worst from three. You know, he's talked about having to kind of find his way on a new team and a new system. You know, a very different experience than what he was doing in Philly. You know, camping in the corner off Joel Embiid post-ups. So it is cool to see him get this, you know, to set a career high is obviously super fun, super cool. I mean, talk about a fun guy to get it. I mean, on a series of post-up floaters and bombing away from three. I mean, I think 5 of 6 from three is nice. You know, the fact that he went 8 of 8 from two.
Well, there was I think he set the tone really for the whole game, and I think it was early second quarter, and it was kind of the run that broke the Bucks' spirit. So the Bucks started out down 20 or 22-2, and it was just one of those like, okay, the shooting probably levels out. This is probably a more competitive game than this, and it kind of was toward the end of the first quarter. Early second quarter, I think it was. Niang is driving up the court, and I think he split Connaughton and Middleton,
yes.
and they were like gonna switch, but they didn't do it in time, and he just drove to the rim, and I think they both kind of looked at each other like, George Niang can do that, and it was and that I think it really set the tone and was like an indicator of where Milwaukee's execution and effort was defensively. Of course, defense has been a big talking point for the Bucks in the opposite way that it had been for the previous 5 years under Mike Budenholzer, and crucially, like with Eric Bledsoe, with Drew Holiday, and all these other guys.
I was not expecting Eric Bledsoe this early into the pod. Kudos.
Well, listen. He was an all defensive level perimeter defender, which the Bucks are dying to add one of those right now. And I think, the funny thing is there is like talk, like, should they play like they did under Bud? Would Bud have let this happen versus new coach Adrian Griffin? They dropped, dude. Like it's slightly different. I'm not saying it's exactly the same, but the run and drop, they're just not good at it because they can't fight over screens at all. And I think especially teams that are athletic, and the Cavs ran a ton in this game, and credit to them because they didn't let the Bucks get back into it. Like they were better. The Bucks didn't have it, but the Cavs kept the foot on the gas the whole night. They were running in semi-transition every time they could. Chris Middleton, Brook Lopez, they're old. They couldn't get back. And the Cavs clearly, identified that and took advantage. But Milwaukee's point of attack defense just leaves a lot to be desired. I think the athletic big man plus the dangerous guard on the perimeter is a bad recipe for the Bucks. And Jared Allen played great again. Of course, Donovan Mitchell does what he does against almost every team. He had 31 too. I would have thought he played. He only played 26 minutes. He had 31 points. So that combo was great. And then the Bucks just moved the ball awesome.
When you're the Cavs and you have an aggressive guard in the perimeter like George Niang, and you have Donovan Mitchell,
that's a big two out there.
That's a big two. So obviously, I think the top of the rundown here says a deep dive into the X's and O's, which we're not going to do. This was one of those classic, like, I do not think the Bucks are going to watch a ton of tape from this one. I think this was a classic, like, light that on fire. We didn't have it physically. We weren't there mentally, and the Cavs sure were. Obviously, the Cavs. The Bucks are going to get a chance to answer the bell because they're going to play twice more in Milwaukee next week on the 24th and the 26th. So that'll be really, really fun. But did want to talk just about a few interesting tidbits. And I think getting past the Niang ridiculous explosion, our boy Jared Allen is having a lot more fun against Brook Lopez than he did last season.
Yeah, he is. I think Brook is another year older, and I think Allen looks better than ever. So I just like that to start. I mean, obviously the way their ages are, Allen being a little better every year at this point in that matchup does make some inherent sense. But I think Brook has been, pushed out of his comfort zone defensively, which is the rim. You're right. And he was rarely not around the rim. And even though they're back to dropping again with him at the 5 whenever they can, he's got so much more ground to cover because you see Damian Lillard, who's actually the better of the Bucks' two perimeter defenders, which kind of tells you all you need to know, and Malik Beasley not getting through screens. And then there's just like, okay, it's Brook and Jared Allen and Donovan Mitchell rolling, right? And that's a lot to cover when you have 10 feet, 12 feet of that versus, the guard is still pretty much, he's got to take a tough shot. I'll stick with the center and I'll rebound, which is the point of drop, right? Is you force the guard into a contested runner, you box out the center, you live with that shot. And normally you can. The Bucks just haven't defended well enough to be able to. But even in like post-ups, I mean, Allen has kind of torched Brook. And I don't know, that isn't explained as much by scheme. I think there could be a little bit of just maybe exhaustion or just frustration. We did see some frustration from Brook in this game. But I think Allen has really, like, the craftiness of his finishing and his post work. Like, he's not the most physical big man. Obviously, that's been, kind of an issue for him at points over his career. But his guile seems like off the charts right now. I mean, he's spinning around. He's moving faster than Brook can react. It's been very impressive. And, like, like it's an old school post footwork thing, but it's not like the brute physicality you think of. It's like he's just very crafty. He almost operates like a guard down there sometimes, and it's been a problem for Brook, and it's been a big thing in this series too, or not playoff series, but in this matchup between these two teams. Allen's had 2 amazing games, and that's something the Bucks have to be concerned with going forward.
Yeah, I mean, like I remember last year when Brook bombed the Cavs out of the building. Maybe that was 2 years ago, but I think it was last year when Brook hit like 8 threes. And Ben Thompson, noted Bucks fan, kind of mentioned about the matchup that when the Cavs are playing Mobley and Allen, they expect to have a better front court than every other team in the league. And the Bucks, it's the inverse. The Bucks have had the advantage at least last year at center and power forward, obviously with Giannis, who did not play tonight. It's got to be again worth bringing up. But the fact that
I'm sure your Cavs fans listening to like cry us a river.
Yeah,
we
of
haven't
course,
had anyone for a month.
Yeah, we haven't had Evan for a month. We haven't had Darius for a month.
All you have is Dame and Chris Middleton and Brook Lopez. Poor you. So yeah, I'm not even gonna. Yeah, I'm not gonna bring up the Giannis was out anymore. I appreciate it's true, of course, but you play with who you got active.
Yeah, absolutely. And but I will say, like Allen, to your point, I do think the craft as a scorer on those rim attacks, because they're the kind of the face up drives, or he's kind of just like doing his hands just kind of coming out at weird angles to finish. And when you're 6'11" and doing that, like if your hand in the ball get to the backboard first, you're probably gonna make the bucket. Brook got him once on one of those rim attacks where he spiked it off the backboard, and and certainly got his, but Allen more than held his own. And I don't know if this might be one of those hyperbolic statements, but I do wonder if what we've seen from Jarrett against guys like Embiid this year, guys like Jokic this year, and guys like Brook this year is like, oh yeah, the Cavs got run off the floor last postseason by a team playing drop, and they couldn't score against it.
Gotta beat it. Gotta find a way to beat it.
Jarrett Allen looks like a guy who spent a lot of time thinking about what to do when he catches the ball in the short roll. With a big man 2-3 steps deep into the paint. I mean, the floaters, he's taking them super confidently. He took probably 4 or 5 mid-rangers tonight. He did so in his career high, or maybe it was his career high game. He had 30 points.
It felt like it
in the first matchup where he went 15 of 17 from the field. I mean, it just feels like a really, really good matchup. And again, that does change things, and you do wonder, like, to your point about the Bucks' point of attack defense, is this development from Jarrett, or is it the Bucks' shell not being quite as strong as it was, and Brook being less able to commit? I would probably say it's a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B, but like as of now, Jarrett has roundly outplayed Brook Lopez in the first 2 games of the season series, and if you're a Cavs fan, you got to be really, really happy with that.
Yeah, and I'm glad you pointed out kind of the floater and the touch from mid-range, because I think that's really important to his success against Brook as well, because, you can be as crafty as you want. Like if your cover can wait at the rim for you, it's still going to be really hard to score over you or over him. And, Brook, when he's given Allen really any space, he's not even always wide open, a couple feet, right? And Brook's a large guy. Like you still kind of feel the impact of the contest. But Allen really hasn't. I mean, his floaters, his mid-rangers have looked really, really good. It reminds me of, like, there was, I think, 2 years ago, and I don't know if he's just kind of fallen off or if he's missed some games, but like Nick Claxton on the Nets. There was a game against the Bucks. I think it was still when KD was on the team. He was just hitting all these like runners and like little hooks when they gave him some space. And I was like, that's a really nice adjustment for a guy who used to pretty much only finish at the rim. I felt the same about Allen this year. Like that's what you have to do to be able to be on the floor and improve and then gain an advantage over the really good teams who will try and steal off the rim, because of course, the rim is so crucial. It's a lot of teams, if they don't drop, they're going to focus to take away the rim. Allen adding that element to his game means, okay, Brook has to come up 2 more steps. Now there is room behind him for a quicker player. It puts Lopez in a really tough position. So yeah, I think certainly the Bucks defense and Brook's defense being a little worse matters, but I think Allen's game looks a lot better too, and don't just want to overlook that as we break down a pretty bad defensive effort from Milwaukee here.
Yeah, a couple more things about this game before we go a little wider angle, because obviously we really shouldn't spend too much more time on this game. It was a pretty brutal game where you don't want to take too much, but I do want to just quickly commend Dean Wade and Isaac Okoro for the jobs they did on Dame or on Chris Middleton and Dame respectively. I mean, this is one of those things that's interesting because as the team gets healthy, there's going to be a lot less minutes for guys like Okoro and Wade to get active run. I felt like this game was kind of almost like a bit of their audition for like, hey, you're still going to need us against really, really good teams because they took over the game in part because those guys could not get clean looks in the first quarter.
Yeah, it was, Dame clearly felt a way about his whistle, which really he has all season. I think he is still adjusting to what it's like to play for Milwaukee to a certain extent, but he also just didn't have a shot early, and he fought through it. I mean, Dame ends with at least 17 points and 5 assists in 25 minutes, so he's kind of productive. Not clearly what you need with Giannis out against a good Eastern Conference team in the Cavs, but got through it to an extent. Chris 1 for 10 and a turnstile defensively, 2 assists to 3 turnovers. I mean, it might be his worst game as a Buck since he's become like a real player. I mean, obviously he came to Milwaukee as I think 2K had him and Giannis as like the worst 2 players in the league. So after he became like a real respectable NBA player. After he became player,
Chris Middleton, guy we know.
Yeah, exactly. It was just awful. I mean, he couldn't get any separation from Wade, and typically that doesn't matter. That was kind of the weird thing about this. Typically he doesn't get that open because we all know he's Chris Middleton, and he tore his hamstring several years ago and has knee issues and just isn't that quick. But his whole game is like, yeah, it doesn't matter if I'm covered. I can just make the shot. And he just didn't. Like, he couldn't get any space. The drives, he really got suffocated on drives. I think the jumpers.
Yeah, Wade ripped him at least a couple times or knocked the ball loose a couple times. It was.
Or just like stopped him in his tracks. I mean, once Brooke was kind of in the way and Chris was like yelling at Brooke about it. And I think it was probably more the overall situation maybe than that specific play happening. Just a lot of frustration on the Bucks end because really nothing was working on either end. But I think with Giannis out, those 2 guys being defended so well, and like credit, you have to defend physically until the officials make you not. I think that's how every sport works, but certainly basketball. And the Cavs found a really good line, and the Bucks couldn't beat it. They were just trying to get calls, and it just didn't work. And that's the issue with doing that, is you just look horrendous if you're going. And I don't know if they were entirely grifting. I mean, Dame went to that same fall away shot that he feels like he gets fouled. He puts the shot up though. They weren't just flicking it up and falling over. But they just couldn't get loose. They couldn't spring anything. And then when you start off cold from 3 and you can't get to the rim, it's just really hard to shake that. And the Bucks have not forced enough turnovers. They haven't gotten to run enough. So they were just kind of stuck in the mud, and you have to credit Okoro and Wade for that to a huge degree.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, it just was a game that was not crazy tightly called. Cavs had 9 personal fouls called against them, which, like, you don't see single-digit foul games in the modern league too much these days. Only 29 combined free throw attempts. Like very different from.
Here's how you know. Yeah. Thanasis played 5.5 minutes and only had 1 foul. That's how you know they let him play.
He is your Kendrick Perkins that the Cavs had a couple years ago. Your foul. I remember at one point during Perk's short-lived Cavs run, he was averaging around 9 fouls per 36.
Did I ever tell you my Perk story from that run?
No.
They sent him down to or maybe this was after when he was with the Charge. Like, I don't think he was assigned. He might have just been there. He's just like floating around. He wasn't playing this game. And they had, I think it was Caleb Swanigan, who rest in peace to Biggie Swanigan. Very unfortunate.
He passed away. That's horrible.
It is. But so he was posting up, and I think Perk had kind of taken a mentorship role on with him. And unbeknownst to me, so I cover the team. I'm sitting at the media table, and Swanigan's posting up, and Perk had went to get popcorn, and he's directly behind me during this post up, and he like just screams some word of encouragement, and I like shot, like I didn't shoot up out of my seat, but I was like startled. I turned around, I was like, what is going on? And literally 2 feet away from me, it's Big Perk, just like, amped, holding popcorn while going back to the bench, just amped about this post up on the Charge. So I will always remember Cavs/Charge-ish Kendrick Perkins.
Oh yeah, what an era for our boy Perk. Last note on the game, the play where AJ Green got chested up by Sam Merrill. That was a basketball Spider-Man meme if I've ever seen one, buddy.
Well, I've noticed every time you get the two white guys, the two shooters, like they go at each other so hard.
Oh yeah,
there's nothing like it.
I mean, there's some peacocking. There's some peacocking going on there.
Dante versus Tyler Hero in the playoffs, the year the Bucks won it all. That was like they won it, and Duncan Robinson. I mean, the Heat have it's some of the most intense basketball you will see at the NBA level. So yeah, that was a fun back and forth. You know, the funny thing is, I was tracking all night because we talked before the game. And you're like, Merrill's shooting 19 threes per 100 possessions or something. And I was like, okay, let's see how well the Bucks do. I'm sure they're going to try and run him off the line. And the funny thing is, they're down like 40. I'm like, at least they're not giving Merrill too many looks. That's one thing I was looking for. And I guess, silver lining, I guess. There's something. He's only made 2, I think.
Yeah, he still got up 6. And there are a lot of clean
that's
ones.
All.
Yeah, I mean, he's obviously been awesome. I do want to quickly say, for those that have, much like myself, have really enjoyed the fact that the Cavs are launching away from 3. They only took 28 threes in this game and scored 135 points. I just think it's important to kind of remind folks how many different avenues there are to really successful offensive nights. Like, obviously, them shooting very, very well on the 28 threes they took. They made 12 of them. Helps, but, you can kill teams at the rim. You can kill teams from 3. Like, I just think it's worth noting that, like, this Cavs team isn't becoming that one-trick pony. Like, if the Cavs are scoring 100, like, I think some people in the Cavs fandom are getting a little too obsessed with, like, hitting certain number benchmarks. And, like, I just know that when the team is fully healthy, if they score 135, I would still have people in my mentions talking about how many threes they took. Like, just note, even when they're playing 5 out or 4 out, like they were tonight, like, they still only took 28 threes because, like, different parts of the floor were hyper available to them, as you are well aware at this point.
Well, and I think, like, one of the plays that is emblematic of that is, and I think the Bucks do have an emphasis. They're not always good at it, and they lost Niang a couple times in his insane first half heater with a messed up switch, and then they went to their zone, and Bobby Portis just didn't go pick him up. I think he was too worried about rebounding, which the Bucks have struggled with that sometimes too. But, like, Merrill's getting run off the line at the top of the key, and he probably could have shot it. Like, he had enough space for him that he could have shot it, and he whips a two-handed pass. I think it was to Tristan Thompson, who finished, like, right at the rim easily. And it was like, yeah, that's the better shot. Like, that's a really nice. I think Merrill had 5 assists, so he was getting run off the line to a little bit. I mean, again, he still got up 6 threes, but for him, he was getting run off the line some, and then immediately making a nice play. So yeah, I certainly think when you can get to the rim, that's even better. I mean, watching Giannis all these years, trust me, like, that's if nobody can stop you from getting to the rim, it's hard to lose too many games.
Yeah, absolutely. And, like, like, this offense can find different ways to support each other. Like, you don't need Sam Merrill to be taking 10 threes. Like, he can find ways to support the team by making that pass, just like the support we get from our video conference software. Support for this podcast and the following message come from Zoom. Have a million businesses connect using Zoom, a single platform for phone, chat, workspaces, events, apps, and video. Zoom enables real-time collaboration for teams around the globe. Zoom, how the world connects. Ty, let's take it a little wider here, because the Bucks have been a weird team this year, man. They are, they're second in the conference. They are, they're quite good, writ large over the course of the season. Plus 3.9 point differential, 15 games over 500. And yet, been a weird vibes year. And if anyone is experienced with good teams with weird vibes, I think it's the Cleveland Cavaliers fans from, years past. Like, we're no stranger to this. And certainly, you look at that 2016 plenty of team. They had plenty of drama all the way through, and plenty of nits to be picked. But what is, to start wide, what are the vibes on this team? Like, what is your read on them? Do they matter? Is this just growing pains, or are there some structural things that really need to be worked on?
I think the vibes are not at a critical level. I actually think they've fought through it pretty admirably, and I think you see these moments where, like, an old team, if they were really over it, I think you would see more. And this is not a good game to talk about this, but like a total losing of the rope, which they did tonight. They just got killed. But to me, it happens to everyone. Yeah, it does, and I think most of the time they've had a game like this. They had a bad run to start the month of January, where I think really they didn't drop for the first 4 games. They went 2-2, but they got blown out in the 2 losses. After that, they had been consistently pretty good most of the time until a bad run to start the year. I think it was like 7 of 8 games on the road. So I think that contributes to it as well. But like, I haven't seen horrible vibes, and I've seen pretty good effort. Like, they go down huge to Utah, who Utah might just be good, by the way. At the time, we're like, oh my God, they're losing to Utah's now beat everyone. But in the second half, they fight back, and it's like a single-digit game with 5 minutes left or something, because Chris Livingston, the 59th pick in the draft, comes and gives a bunch of effort and fights through some screens, and they go on a little run. And I think Houston, they made a similar, they were down too much. They made the comeback, but they couldn't complete it. They beat the Spurs in a really close, really fun Giannis Wemby game.
That was my favorite game of the year so far.
That was an awesome game. But then they beat the pants off of Boston, who was on the second night of a back-to-back, and we'll tell you no team has ever endured that before. And then they beat the Warriors and the Kings in a back-to-back where the Kings game was closer than it should be, but Dame had his first walk-off as a Buck, so it's kind of worth it to go to overtime. So I feel like the vibes are okay. I think they just have one clear issue, and it's just a lack of perimeter defensive talent on the roster. And I think I think they will, but I think when they fix that issue and find the right guard to slot in there, everything will just look so much better, because it's one of those things where it doesn't sound like it's that important. Like, you scrape it by, whatever. And they have. I mean, like you said, they're second in the East. It's not like they've, 5 games under 500 or something. But I think it makes everything so much easier for everyone else. Both adding that player to use on premier threats, as well as then slotting down everyone else's responsibilities by a level. And I just think they need it. And credit to Malik Beasley, he's shooting the cover off the ball. He just can't be that guy. And it's, he's improved his defense from I think where he was coming in. He just can't be that guy. They need a guy who can do that. I don't think that's on the roster right now. Crowder's played well. I think they just need a guard to do it. And I'm sure, knowing John Horst, they will be uncovering every stone looking for one.
Yeah, I mean, and honestly, what's the cupboard looking like? It is tough when you go trade for Dame Lillard to be like, all right, let's go upgrade the roster with supplementary pieces. Are you of the opinion these have to be high level role players that you really trust, or how do you, what's the road to improving that? Because I agree with you on this front. It's really hard to play drop if you can't stay connected to the back hip.
It turns out most of the schemes don't work if you don't have that first part.
If you can't guard.
That's what the Bucks have learned. Griffin, for his faults, and there are certainly some, I think late game management is one of the worst, and he struggled at when to foul up 3 and those sorts of things. But I think kind of we've seen that process evolve, and hopefully we'll get better by the end of the year. They'll throw out 3-4 different coverages in game, and it's teams figure them out. Their zone has maybe been their best, and you just can't run zone the whole game. It just doesn't
certainly not
work
against the Cavs team, mostly down all their actual ball handlers and playing exclusively guys who can shoot the cover off the ball. And then
losing Niang, who was 9 for 9 at the time. So, I think the cupboard is they have 2 promising young players, and I won't include Livingston because we've seen him on the NBA floor for 5 minutes. I just don't imagine there's too much value there right now, even though he's been enticing enough. Andre Jackson Jr., the rookie, 36th pick out of UConn, who is just he doesn't look at the rim enough, even though he's shooting pretty well from 3 and he's a hyper athlete. He actually, one of the few bright moments from the game was he finished a layup through a contest. And it's not that he wasn't finishing them, it's that he just didn't take them. And we were going crazy because someone he'll be out there with Giannis and Dame, and someone passes him the ball, and he's got a lane to the rim, and he's 8 feet away, and he just swings it right back out. It's that's a good pass. He's a great passer. Just dunk. Just dunk. That's all you have to do. Just go to the rim and dunk. Hasn't done it enough.
Yeah, that's no strange news to Cavs fans who have been imploring Dean Wade and Isaac Okoro to be aggressive on offense, and in this game they were. Those record scratches. The league is just too hard to record scratch on offense at this point. When you have an advantage, you have to be able to press it.
Yeah. Well, especially for a Bucks team that needs to rely on offense. So every time they do gum up offensively, they really end up paying for it. I mean, they get killed when they can't score for 4 minutes. And then the other team, I mean, we all know how the game,
it's how the game started.
Stops, Yeah, it is. Exactly. When you get stops, the ball goes in easier on the other end, and vice versa. So I think, they feed into their own bad play. But Andre Jackson Jr., Marjon Beauchamp, year 2, pretty promising again, perimeter wing player. They're both shooting the ball well, which I think is probably beneficial. And then the Bucks somehow, through the Dame trade with Portland, kept Portland's own second-round pick this coming season, which is going to be a top 35, top 36 at worst pick in the draft. So that's actually a decent draft asset they have to spare or send, and they also have one of their own future seconds. So they won't be, high price shopping by any means. I would imagine someone like an Alex Caruso is out of budget. So looking more of like Chris Dunn, Matisse Thybulle, if he's going to be available. Right now, I mean, Bruce Brown is kind of floating out there. It's just a little intriguing. The Bucks would have to send Pat Connaughton and Bobby Portis, I think, to make the salary work. So that's a big cost. 2 guys who were very important to your championship run. 2 guys who have had up and down seasons. Bobby Portis was good tonight. Pat actually had one of his nicer games of the year, kind of obscured by...
Which is not good because he had 8 points on 3 of 4 shooting.
Yeah. I mean, that's a Pat Connaughton nice game. He blocked Sam Merrill, which I was like, that did not have that on my bingo card whatsoever. But 8 points for Pat this year on 4 shots is like a revelatory game, unfortunately. It tells you where his season has been at. And again, was such a better fit on a team with Drew than a team with Dame. When, you need guys who shoot, you can't have the record scratchers, as you said, but you also need defense more than ever. And I think you can very much tell this Bucks roster, they built it all to fit around Drew, and then Dame became available, and you don't say no. But then you got a bunch of guys who were more offense heavy to complement Drew, and then Drew was gone for Dame, who's the opposite player. And I think it needs to be a rebalancing there.
Yeah, and one thing that I think is really important to note is, Dame, this was, very similar to the Cavs going for Mitchell. When you come out of left field to go get someone, it's really hard to immediately pivot and then build the new roster around them right away. Yeah. We talked a lot about how the Cavs roster last year was very ill-fitting after the Donovan Mitchell trade. They were playing 2, maybe 3 guys who were really reliable shooters in their whole rotation in the modern league, and Kobe Altman gets an offseason to regroup and evaluate what the team needs, and he goes and gets Strus, he goes and gets Niang, goes and, he signs Sam Merrill at the end of last year.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, whoa, the roster looks like it makes a lot more sense. I think the pressure of where Dame and Giannis are in their careers, and even Chris for that matter, I think it's just is making it so it's kind of harder to give a guy like John Horst that grace period to go find guys. He probably can't wait till next year.
Definitely not.
He's got to find them now, and
they have to. Yeah,
and this is where the skill gap is going to come into play. He's going to have to find them. Andre Jackson Jr. Has been a really cool story. I don't think you really want him being the only thing you have going for you against Donovan Mitchell.
No, you don't.
At this point in his career, and that's no slight to Jackson, who's had a really fun start to the year. One question I also had about this roster, one lesson that, I always talk about when your season ends badly, and both the Cavs seasons and the Bucks seasons ended badly last year, and, way earlier than anyone was expecting. It's all about what lessons you kind of choose to learn. The Cavs clearly chose to learn that they needed shooting. They didn't go get a bunch of rebounders to try to, they didn't try to go get a bunch of big, tough, burly dudes, with the exception of Tristan, who has been a revelation. But
still can't believe he was a full-time broadcaster.
Yep.
And I'm just going to go be a good role player again.
I don't know if you know this. He's got the highest offensive rebound rate of his career this year, which is...
It kind of makes sense, though. Think of how much even from those peak Cavs years, how much smaller and more spread out the league has gotten. It kind of makes sense that he'd just be actually, it's even
just
easier
beating
now.
Up bench bigs.
Yeah.
But, with the exception of Tristan, who, I don't think even the Cavs front office knew they were getting this out of him when they signed him. They clearly leaned into shooting. The Bucks clearly said, we need closers. We cannot have this gunky half-court offense. So they clearly chose to learn that lesson in pursuing a guy like Dame at the expense of a guy like Holiday. One lesson I don't know if they really chose to learn was athleticism. It still kind of feels like in the non-Giannis division, which is a pretty big division in fairness, but in the non-Giannis division, sure feels like they're not a super springy, fast team. What's your thoughts on that? And is that another deficiency on top of the defense?
Yeah, I think it definitely is. And I think that's part of the, thinking about potential trades or just roster shakeup is you look at the bench and the veterans coming off the bench and starting next to Giannis, and there's not much athleticism there. Like, I think Bismack Biyombo, I believe, is currently cleared waivers and is now a free agent. Carter, I'm salivating over Bismack Biyombo. I've been posting about Bismack Biyombo since before they even released him. I was like, I wonder if they could get the salaries together to trade for. And then they cut him, and I was like, this is my dream. Like, let's make the 2-for-1 trade. Bring in Big Biz. He's an athletic big. Like, they just need athletes out there, and I think they've gone to it in the draft. But as just like the timeline, like those guys just aren't ready yet.
Yeah, Beauchamp has been cool, but it's like, are you really going to play him in a conference championship series? I don't know.
It's like his or Andre Jackson, probably just one of them. You wouldn't trust two. So far, Jackson has gotten the nod. I think you can afford probably one of them off the bench. That's kind of like a, kind of exploratory, maybe earlier in the series thing. But you probably don't want them playing in the second half of a deciding game, right? Just because that's young players. Typically, you just can't do that. So that is, I think, one of their biggest issues as well. And I think you probably just had to pick to a certain extent which one you wanted to go after. And I think, Dame is Dame, and you just have to do that. But it wouldn't surprise me if they tried to go a little more athletic coming off the bench as well, even if it's not a player who fits as well offensively. I think one lesson is, now that they have opened up the floor so much with the new point guard, you can afford guys who, again, Andre Jackson Jr., Marjon Beauchamp, they're shooting a high percentage. They're not really regarded as shooters, though. And they've had some really good minutes just because, okay, you're out there with those two guys, cut at the right time. Be ready. Play
when the
hard
defense stretches out to 30 feet, it's just going to be...
There's room.
Yeah, you're just going to have room to operate. And if you're savvy, you can make do with a lot of that athleticism. So, I mean, it's been an interesting year. Again, they're a very, very good team. They are, probably a top 4, top 5 finals contender in the league right now. I don't think I would go any worse than that, despite all these, well-established issues. So it's like, it a little bit of it is rich people problems. It's an embarrassment of riches to be worried about this when you can go so nuclear on offense. Like I think they have an offensive gear that maybe only Denver can reach. But they do have some weird schematic things and just some weird cultural stuff. They are redefining who they are mid-season, and that is hard to do. So I did want to go a little zoom out even further and just talking about the Eastern Conference. We have the Pacers kind of making a reported Pascal Siakam trade today. Kind of looks like they want to be here to stay. And the East is just nuts, man. Boston, Milwaukee, Philly, Cavs, New York, Miami, Indiana, and then you even have, pesky Orlando, who is a little banged up right now, but as tough as anyone in the league on the defensive end, big, young, poised to get better year over year. Where do you kind of tier out the Eastern Conference right now, Ty? Like, because it is so, there's so much talent at the top right now that it's kind of hard to figure out for me where people should go.
It's really difficult. I think, was it the offseason we did this?
Yep.
Or we ranked them for playoffs. The trade's official.
Oh, there it is.
It's on NBA transactions now. The Raptors had to actually waive Christian Coloco, pretty promising, but often injured big man. Yeah, it's a surprising one.
That is surprising. He showed some stuff.
I know he's had a lot of. I wouldn't be shocked if they ended up bringing him back at some point. But they had to make a roster. Anyway,
yeah, roster crunch. It happens. Yeah. It's part of it. They picked up the Kira Lewis to get New Orleans out of the tax. Out of the tax. But either way, now it's not reported. Yeah. It's real. It happened.
Yeah.
So
actual trade.
Yeah. So actually, before you tear out, I do want to hear your thoughts on that trade because it is an interesting one.
I love it for Indiana. I've seen a lot of this doesn't move the needle for them. They're not a contender now. What happened to when is it bad to just get better? That's a good thing. And I think even beyond just that narrative idea of the trade. And I'm always I'm always one where just like, if you can make your team better and not like insanely mortgage your future, just do it. Like being better, good for a sustained period is oftentimes more valuable in the league than like, oh, we'll save all our assets and just like, have 42 wins forever and all of our players will get sick of it and everything else. We play in Indiana. We're not going to sign anyone in outright free agency. We all know how it is. We'll get Bruce Brown, but it'll cost us $20 million a year with an option. So I love it. I thought 2 first-round picks this year that are almost certainly not going to be lottery picks, and then 1 future first is like totally fine to bring in Siakam. They're going to pay him a lot. That's fine. I think schematically on the court, you look at how good Tyrese Halliburton is and how teams, will try to trap him and he has to like fight through the trap, or, his outlet is like Benedict Mathurin, or, these guys who are good players, but they're not devastating you 4-on-3. With Siakam, you can't do that. Like if Siakam screens for Halliburton and you trap Halliburton, I think Siakam 4-on-3 is going to look so rejuvenated with the spacing and the situation he's been in Toronto really since Kawhi left. I mean, they were good a couple times, but they haven't had the same kind of team. I think the way they play is going to be good for him. He probably slows them down a little bit, but I think he makes them a much more respectable, consistent team. Now, they may be a contender right now. I don't know. I mean, they're 4-1 against the Bucks. I mean, certainly they've had some success against good teams. They beat the Celtics in that run too. I don't want to exactly define their ceiling right now. I would put them probably in like a puncher's chance tier, but I think their floor raises a lot with this, and I think it gives Halliburton the running mate he clearly needs and deserves based on how he's played this year.
Yeah, something we talked a lot about this offseason for the Cavs was like one of the reasons I was so excited about the Strus and Niang edition specifically was like it was going to give them a context in which they could really evaluate the core 4 really, really well. Like and that's really important. You have to know what you have, so like playing these crunchy lineups with not enough reliable role playing and spacing, like was it Evan and Jarrett not being good enough, or was it the context? Was it the matchup? You need to, eliminate variables where you can. And like to me, trading for a guy like Siakam is now putting you in a context where you can really evaluate, like, okay, Halliburton is really, really good. Is he a star or is he a super duper star? Because super duper stars are the guys who elevate other stars as well as remain excellent even when, their usage goes down a little bit. So I really, really like it in that context. I mean, obviously they just had a gaping hole at the 4 that Siakam now fills. To your point about him slowing them down a little, I agree. But I also think when you're a team like that, they are just such a bombs away 3-point shooting team. And that's awesome. They're very, very good at it. They play so fast. They generate clean looks doing that. Sometimes it's nice to have someone who can get some nasty buckets and beat people up. When you play a really switchy team, like you want, like Siakam is a great switch masher, in a way that like a guy like Miles Turner is just never going to be.
Yeah.
Turner.
Yeah, I think their pick and roll is just going to be so hard to handle. I mean, I've seen people say, you just switch it. You live with that. Most teams don't have one player who can guard Halliburton one-on-one, much less two guys who can guard either of them one-on-one. I mean, if they're isoing you, you probably live with it to a certain extent, but yeah. I think those are 2 players who it's going to be very hard. I think it's like, I don't know, 75, 80% of what the Bucks have with Dame and Giannis, which it's like that's a really, really hard action to guard. And they are such a smart offensive team with everything else they do. It's not like they're just going to spam it like the Bucks don't, but it's a great base to have. The Pacers didn't really have a base, right? Like, what's their base plan? Tyrese make magic happen. Tyrese with a role player,
and it's worked. It's worked really well.
They're
but
going to be the best offense in history, or something. I think.
I think it's important to just remember in those kind of conversations that like Siakam is like a true blue power forward. He's not one of these like big 6'8" threes masquerading as a 4. Like, for example, like if you're the Cavs, you really can't switch Karis LeVert onto him. If you got a 6'6", 6'7" wing guarding a guy like Halliburton and they set that screen action, you're not gonna be able to switch it. And when you give Tyrese Halliburton an advantage, he feasts. Like he is one of the best with advantage players in the entire NBA right now. So I think it's a really interesting kind of move, because if you look at that East middle class right now, and I think we can get to our tiers here. Yeah, it is very, very congested. I think most folks would have had the Pacers on the outside looking in of that middle class prior to the trade. You know, is the nice story. They might, you know, if they get a good matchup, they might be able to knock someone out too. Like, are they just in that group? So I do want to just take it back to Ty. What are your tiers in the East right now? And we're talking playoff success tiers.
Yeah.
I'm not worried about, you know, regular season wins right now.
I hate to do it. I kind of think Philly's cracked the top tier.
I thought you were gonna say something way more controversial, which is, would you put Boston in their own tier right now?
Oh no, I actually wouldn't. I
don't think I would
they
either.
Look great. They look great, but I think they're still. You know what's funny is the Bucks defend them better than maybe any other team.
They are.
I think it's just they'll beat themselves. I mean, they'll get suckered into the same bad shots, and they make them a lot, but the shot look is just not good enough. And I think maybe Porzingis will be able to do enough, but I think those guys are a little bit set in their ways, and there's almost a little bit of like diminishing returns on having. It sounds stupid, but having like so much talent on ball, it's like you're not using a lot of it a lot of the time. They're really good. I think you have to rank them first in their tier so far, but I wouldn't put them in their own tier. I would say, God, I hate doing this. Boston, Milwaukee, Philly, and I'm still gonna throw in Miami. And I hate myself
in tier one.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
How could I not? How many times have they won the East in the last 5 years and they look dead? I have to.
It's fair. I think that's a fair precedential thing, and like I think with
Jimmy
Miami
clocked in for the season yesterday and had like 30 points or something. He didn't care before this. Like I knew too much to have any joy when they looked like they sucked again. I know too much now.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's just never gonna fully align. But like also, I was doing some pity partying about a week ago and looked at, you know, how many games each team's top three in the East had appeared in. And the Cavs, their top three of you know, Garland, Mitchell, and Mobley have only appeared in 12 games so far this season. The Heat's top three have appeared in 8.
Yeah.
So like, you know, they're banged up again. They're never, you know, fully whole, and they're just surviving 7 games over 500 with a plus 0.6 point differential. So I think that's fair. Let's give me your tier 2.
Cleveland, and I think they're probably the closest at breaking through. It's close to the standings. I'd say probably Cleveland, New York, Indy, and stop it there.
Yeah, would you have had Indy in that tier prior to this trade? Because I don't think I would have, and I think I would.
I probably would have before. It's probably biased because they played so well against the Bucks, but I look at Halliburton himself, and I see as good a best player as anyone else in the tier.
That goes a long way.
Yeah, so I put that, and I don't think anyone below them, I would say that about it.
Is that the order you would put in that tier in? Would you put Cavs above the Knicks, despite the fact that the Knicks, you know, kind of embarrassed the Cavs?
I didn't do this before. Maybe I would put Knicks first just now post OG trade. I didn't love what I saw from them, but I do think that's like a really nice trade to just speed up their timeline a bit.
They're playing really good basketball right now, too.
Yeah, they're flourishing right away after it too, which, you know, I haven't dug into like who they're exactly playing. You never really know, but good basketball is good basketball. I mean, they are playing as well as anyone in the East right now in like the last 10 games. So I think it's close. I mean, like you say, the Cavs just make so much more sense now. And I think what they've done, you know, with the opposite of what the Knicks did. The Knicks added a great player. The Cavs lost all their great players. And they just continue to win games. I think at a certain point, like whether it's the talent of the group or like the resiliency of the group, of course it's some mixture of both, but seeing that has to mean something too, right? And that's the kind of thing where people say regular season doesn't matter. This is a big time statement from the Cavs. So not just like go 500, but to go on a winning streak and like move up to the top 4 without so many of their key players recently. That's like a big time thing. That means a lot to me. Like, I think that's a really important thing to see from Cleveland.
Yeah, I mean, right when the day that both Darius and Evan were announced to be out,
everyone was
within
like,
2 hours, I tweeted something to the tune of, this is going to be a test for the culture that they say they've been building.
Yeah.
You know, like my biggest pet peeve in NBA coverage is when people talk about culture where, you know, someone parachutes into a team that happens to be overperforming expectations for 2 weeks. They write a glowing piece about their culture and how together they are. And then the second there's a problem, I guess the culture is gone because they're not good anymore. You know, so like the fact that the Cavs are kind of proving like, you know, like this has been a team that's kind of been building around good dudes that love basketball and are actually care about each other and about winning. And the fact that they've come and won 6 games in a row now, and have only lost 3 games since those guys both went out officially. Evan was out a few games prior to that, but since the Darius injury, they've only lost 3 games. I mean, that is resilience, that is culture, that is buy-in,
player development.
Yeah.
How about Craig Porter Jr. just stepping in? I mean, Merrill's older than everyone thinks, given how little he's played, but a good find who's played really well for them. I mean, it's wins on a lot of levels. It's really impressive stuff. I wanted to get to that at some point, so I'm glad we got to cover it here. But yeah, I think them and the Knicks, I mean, it would be kind of poetic if they were the 4 or 5 again. I think it would be a different series. I think it would be a really good series, probably better than the last one. And then
I hope so, because the last one sucked.
Well, hey, you and me both. I see. Oh, the Heat are above the play-in now, so that's good news for the Bucks. But Indy's in there. That's the new Bucks boogeyman, I guess. But then
it's so close. I cannot believe, Ty. I cannot believe I am standings watching in January.
Well, I mean, that's your whole point, though, right? Like, it's a pretty loaded East. I mean, Boston has 4 games on the Bucks, so they have a nice cushion. But then there's 4 games that separate 6 and 2. So there's just a lot of talented teams. I mean, Orlando, I'm just gonna put them in their own tier of like nobody wants to play them, but they're not going to beat anyone in a series. But like, that's a good team, and they're 8th, and they're like pretty solidly 8th, I think, in standings and in talent. Everything below them is just, I don't care. Your team doesn't inspire me. It's meaningless to me. You're going to get destroyed. But Orlando, they're fun.
Yeah. It is a cool conference, man, because all these teams are, it in some ways it kind of feels like the conference when I was a kid. Like there was always 1 or 2 really good teams, but the middle class felt a lot stronger. You go back to the Cavs, 4 straight title runs, and it was really a 1-team conference, or a 1.5 team conference. And I just don't think
either
that
Indy or Boston, and that was about it.
Like as good as Boston, Milwaukee are, I would keep them in their own tier still, just from a talent perspective.
I should have. Yeah.
As good as they are, I do think anyone in the 3 through 7 could have a good week and a half.
Yeah.
And knock them off, I wouldn't bet it. I don't think the lines would say that, but basketball with 7-game series, like sometimes it can be a fait accompli that, the better team's just going to win. I just don't think that's as much the case this year in the conference, even compared to what's going on out West, where it's just the league's just really good. I think that's every time I go like, oh, the East is actually really, and then I go look at the West, and the West is
it's like, oh my God.
West is just as nuts.
Yeah, I will say this for like the transaction nerds, which I am one. When they inevitably expand, which clearly they can do because there's just talent everywhere, except for the 4 teams who have decided they have nothing to play for, it's going to be like the most hype event on nerd basketball Twitter ever. I think it is going to happen. We know it's going to happen eventually. But I think you look at the league, it's like, yeah, it probably could. I mean, these teams are all loaded. And I agree. I mean, it doesn't remind me of, I wasn't alive, but like the 80s. The 80s Bucks are like kind of a great forgotten team because they were really good with Marcus Johnson, Sidney Moncrief, Terry Cummings later on. But they ran into Larry Bird and the Celtics, and I think Dr. J and the Sixers, and they could just never get over those 2. I think there's a couple other series in there, but it was it reminds me of that, where it's like, okay, Bird's probably going to get the best of the conference most years, but there's it means something to win a second round this year, and maybe even a first round. But certainly, if you beat a team in the second round, you go to the conference finals. That's a huge accomplishment, I'd say, for any of these teams. I mean, Boston and Milwaukee, of course, would.
They just have different pressure and different timelines.
Yeah.
But that would be an outside noise type of thing that would denigrate that accomplishment. Getting there, if you're,
it's not going to be easy.
Yeah, it's not going to be easy, and. It'll be an interesting styles make fights. You mentioning a potential Cavs-Knicks rematch both got me excited and filled with dread because OG Anunoby, I think, guards Donovan better than anyone in the entire NBA.
That's such a nice pickup for them. That's the thing, too. They're all getting better. Like, I thought the Knicks were already pretty good, maybe a little uninspiring, but it's like, oh, just throw in OG Anunoby. Yeah, that's pretty much like best case RJ Barrett. They just made that happen, and that's a hell of a team.
Yeah, it's going to be a really, really fun end of year, and I'm really excited that next week we're even going to get more Bucks basketball. Hopefully we get to maybe see a little Darius Garland back. Maybe we'll see. Well, I would expect to see Giannis back. For the other two games. I don't think that's not supposed to be a long-term injury, correct?
No, they said day to day. His shoulder bothered him. He kind of got it wrenched a couple of games ago in a hard, battle in the paint or a drive. So you kind of saw him nursing it, and I'm guessing he just continued to feel it and decided to get 5 days off or whatever he gets now. I think he'll be back for the next game against the Pistons, but they do have 2 against the Pistons, and one of them's a day game, so really anything could happen.
Yeah, well, certainly hope to see him back. I mean, as nice it is to get to play them without him, the Cavs are thinking much bigger picture, and they want to test themselves against the best teams, and the Bucks are certainly not their best selves without Giannis. But you were your best self on this podcast tonight, Ty. Thank you very much for staying up late. Go ahead and plug whatever it is you have to plug, my friend.
Real simple and easy. GSPN.info has my socials, our Bucks podcast. We also do other Wisconsin sports shows covering the Brewers and Packers. Who?
Oh, by the way, I am so upset about that Packers Cowboys game. I am hurt at the core.
You knew it was coming, though, right?
The Packers. I'm gonna start when I see a green jersey on a football field. I think I'm just gonna start shuddering. They've been torturing me for the last decade now.
Well, I mean, imagine what it's like to be in the NFC North. And now everyone's agreed, they actually did it again. And they did. And it doesn't make any sense. Part of me, here's my hottest take. Everyone should just sit for at least 2 years. Because you look at all 3 of those quarterbacks, and they sat. And I'm not saying they wouldn't have been, great if they played early. I think it matters more than people say. I think we've seen guys get their careers ruined by having to play too early. We don't need to do this convo here. You're wrapping up. GSPN.info has all the links. You can check out my show for hopefully more positive Bucks stuff going forward, and certainly more coverage of Bucks Cavs, as we got plenty of games coming up. And I think hopefully a better just overall game than we got tonight would be good for both of those.
I think that would be for the best too, or we're not going to have much more to talk about on our respective pods. Ty, it's always such a lovely time talking to you. Thank you so much for coming on. And if you are listening to the Chase Down Pod, please be sure to hit that subscribe button, subscribe, unsubscribe, resubscribe, and help us cook those books, exploit that faulty algorithm. If you're watching on YouTube, please make sure you are hitting a subscribe button. Make sure you're liking all our videos. Make sure you're sharing those to your friends. Obviously, we want to keep growing that. Thank you so much for consuming the Chase Down Pod, whether you're listening or you're watching. Justin, enjoy Mexico, and as always, go Cavs.